Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We'll begin in a few minutes after we give everybody an opportunity to join. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar with Vectra. It's an exciting opportunity to discuss how we can better implement security across our estate. My name is Joe Burtnick. I'm the CTO for cybersecurity here at Contact, and I'll be your host today. We also have Dave Lomax from Vectra, who will be taking us through some of the exciting things you can do with Vectra, especially for analytics and AI and threat hunting at the network layer, and some of the demonstration of their product set. This is actually part of a series of webinars that we've been doing around security within the cloud and security based on Azure Sentinel, because for many of us, the challenges of securing our organization against an ever increasing and ever scalable adversary becomes quite a challenge. And so where we have seen solutions that deliver cloud-based technology with embedded protection that really enables the organization to do detection response as well as active threat hunting can be really useful for organizations to secure their infrastructure, to increase their intelligence and awareness across the estate, and really get a better handle on what's going on within their organization. Now, we partner with Vectra AI because it really meets all of those key requirements and weaves nicely into our Cyber Defense Center solution, where we're able to do and offer a managed service for providing security monitoring across the estate. Of course, critical to that is not only the technology and capability that is embedded within Azure Sentinel, which both David and I will be talking about today, but the ability to see into the organization, to see all of the dark recesses where information may be traveling, especially at the network layer or other threat surfaces within the organization. And so Cyber Defense Center is our managed service that weaves these together to be able to deliver a single integrated offering for our customers. And this is part of a suite of services that we offer around security, awareness, protection, vulnerability management, all extensions to being able to implement security monitoring with threat intelligence, automation, and AI via our Cyber Defense Center solution. So we're excited to be able to extend that visibility using Vectra AI and be able to really deliver on that SOC Triad that David will be speaking about, where we're going to be able to see information across the whole estate. And this ultimately is designed to help organizations better put themselves on the front foot in dealing with incidents within their organizations, be able to see, diagnose, research threats within their business, and to leverage automation to be able to close those holes and reduce the rest of their business. So with that being said, let me turn it over now to David and introduce him.
Hey, good morning. Did I get the sharing right? Can everyone see everything? Good, perfect. Hey, good morning, everyone. And Joe, thank you very much. What a great intro, appreciate that. So, as Joe rightly said, we're going to be talking about the SOC Visibility Triad and how we can do that with Microsoft and Vectra AI. It's an important step forward, I think. Gartner have often talked about how things can be done and the right way to do things, and it's definitely something that ourselves and Microsoft all agree with now. This is, if you're going to do things, this is the right way to be doing it with the SOC Visibility Triad, which consists of network detection response, endpoint detection response, and a SIM. So without further ado, I'll go into it a little more depth. So, it's a personal journey. The least favorite question you have to ask, if you were breached, would you know? And what could you do about it? Now, the reality of that is, not many people would be aware of that. If we think about the SolarWinds breach recently, this went from large security companies, large government bodies, and because of a slight supply chain attack, they weren't actually aware of it. So, what would they do? We know prevention will fail. If you look at the perimeter side of things and what we used to do, which is pull up the portcullis and protect ourselves from the outside world, we know that fails. Sadly, it also fails silently. So a lot of the times we don't know these things. So, again, while I don't want to talk about it too much, we go back to the SolarWinds. A lot of these companies were large security companies, and they didn't see this. They saw parts of it, or potentially saw parts of it, but none of it was ever at the level of criticality that they did anything with it. And that's a really big problem. I think most of us have seen in the news multiple times about organizations that have been compromised, and this seems to be a weekly, daily, monthly occurrence, right? This happens all the time. So we know the prevention has failed. We know that once they get into your network, it's a problem. I think the last M-Trends report I saw in 2019, 90 days attackers are in an environment before they get caught. Most of us would be slightly concerned if people are in our houses for that length of time without being detected. So let's look at the 5 significant challenges for the SOC. If we go across this, coordinated attacks, they are very smart. Some of these attacks, look at again at the SolarWinds one, while we probably believe this was nation state because the complexity of it, actually some of the things it was using underneath was commonly used tooling. It was actually Cobalt Strike with the C2 command under there. But there's very clever coordinated attacks that are going into these things. Attackers know what they're doing. They know how to behave. The good news is when you look at how coordinated attacks, the reason we have the MITRE ATT&CK framework and we have the Lockheed kill chain is because there are still steps you have to go through to get this to happen. I've always jokingly said it's a bit like doing a bank job. You still have to understand, how do I get into the bank? How do I compromise the security? How do I get the money? How do I get the money out? And then how do I launder that money? Those steps are the same with anything if you're going to try and do that kind of activity. Same with attackers. They still have to get a compromise a machine internally or on the cloud or an account, use that machine, use that account to then move deeper into the network, escalate my privileges, get the data I want, get the data off, or encrypt that data. So, while they're very complicated, the steps they have to go through have remained the same.
And I think that the SolarWinds attack is a great example, David, of how there are threat surfaces that customers should be concerned about that they probably didn't even think about. Whether or not an application that they had malicious code in it that nobody knew about. And I think it really exposes why organizations need to not just think about a pure threat surface-centric approach, but also how to, because of these coordinated attacks and they use common behaviors, how they need to expand that visibility out to other parts of their network.
Absolutely, Joe, that's 100% correct. If you think about the way that certainly these things happened and how other things have happened, the one thing I always talk about, the first thing, if you look at anything, I know people have talked about IAM for a while now, But privileged accounts and account attacks are normally the first point. Actually, the initial compromise we know was code in the supply chain for SolarWinds, but the next thing they did was compromise O365 credentials. The amount of Office 365 credential phishing that's out there is quite phenomenal. If you understand how Office 365 works under the hood, you've got this thing called Power Automate as well, which you can think of as PowerShell for the cloud, or PowerShell for Office 365. You can do a lot of things in there, and if you're not looking at not only what is happening in Office 365, but also what's happening in my cloud applications, my cloud services, my on-prem network, if you can't put all that together, it's very difficult to pinpoint this types of activity. So, a lot of these attacks quite rightly are very complicated. When you look at SolarWinds, when you look at even WannaCry for that matter, there's bits of it that are quite complex of how they work. But if you're looking at it end to end and understanding the full attack kill chain, it makes it a lot easier. But it's complicated and it's not an easy thing to detect. Talent's probably the big thing as well. When we talk about SOCs, hiring good people that understand these threats and have the tooling to go and do it is really hard. We know there's an industry shortage trying to hire good SOC analysts. We've certainly heard, in the finance sector that they're changing those quite a lot, and people are demanding quite high salaries because they just don't have and can't get the talent they need. It's really hard to get hold of people, and often you hear of people that are leaving these SOC because they're overworked and getting data that's not very important to them. So when they're looking at things purely from a log perspective, it can be really boring and dull, and they chase down many rabbit holes that don't actually give them any high value. So alert fatigue is something we hear a lot about now. The last NCSC conference up in Glasgow, they were actually talking, there was a main stage event talking about alert fatigue, where these sim worlds that are flooding them with alerts. It's really bad, and a lot of people are getting a bit fed up with that. You can then also, that also lends itself, to budgetary pressure. The pressure of hiring a good SOC team and having the right tools and resources, it's really tough, and that's a big budget problem for a lot of people. And then you've got a lot of siloed security products where you've got these assets that should be doing different areas of the security, but there's no end-to-end cohesion there. It's all very much siloed products looking at a particular area. Maybe they're looking at IAM, maybe they're looking at this, maybe they're looking at that. Putting them all together, while sometimes you can send it to the SIM, doesn't actually give you a holistic view, and that's the biggest problem, is having these tool sets that can see you very small points in time, but together it means something important. On its own, it can be quite uninteresting. And then the dwell times of that, the long dwell times allow attackers to reach very high value targets. They can escalate their privileges, they can get deeper into the network long before anyone knows it's happening. So 90 days, like I said, M-Trends report back in 2019. I don't imagine it's changed very much in the last few years. It might even be longer now. But yeah, that's a long time for people to be poking around. The term low and slow, where people could be inside your network doing things quite slowly. That sort of smash and grab approach of getting in, pulling data out doesn't happen very often with these advanced attacks. They're actually spending time to crawl around and look into this to see exactly what's been going on. It makes a big difference, and I think that's a big issue for a lot of people. So Gartner's SOC Visibility Triad model, what they're talking about, what they're saying is the three things you need, and they need to all work together well, is that network detection response, that endpoint detection response, and a SIM to put it all together. Often that's a single pane of glass. And then, something I've talked about for a while, and that, I think it's right to say, is that security orchestration and response sits in the middle. Think of that as the connective tissue to go and do things, and multiple products are telling you things. You can link that and go and say, right, I'm going to go and tell my Defender ATP, I'm going to go and tell my firewalls, I'm going to go and tell my Microsoft AD or Azure AD to isolate these accounts. So, one of the big things we talk about, and it's a big part of Microsoft's messaging as well, is it's reducing the risks and cost. You want to make sure you're reducing your risk and threat vector, but the costs associated with that are spiraling. And what you can do to do that is that increasing in efficiency and effectiveness. Enable your people, empower the processes, and integrate the technology together. Those three things can have a huge saving. We went through a process of Vectra very recently with a really large multinational. And when we did the maths of how more efficient their SOC team would have been, it worked out to be 160 man hours, which even to us was like, that seems really big numbers. But we ran the numbers again. That's exactly what was happening. Typically, we see a 34 times efficiency reduction in doing this. So it's really important that people look at that and understand, you know, can I make my SOC team much more efficient? So reducing the dwell time, that network visibility, looking at everything that's going into your network, endpoint coverage as well. So in that case, Defender ATP, you know, having a direct integration with Defender ATP, excuse me. Within the Vectra platform, we can integrate directly with Defender ATP, and we can isolate hosts from the network. We can pull in endpoint information as well to enrich that host information from Defender ATP. You can also pull in log and behavior analytics from other areas. So, you know, we can pull in logs from AD or Azure AD to say who's been logging in, when they were logging in, so you can get those VPN logs as well of individual users at that area. But also, you know, once you've got that thing, think of Sentinel. That might be your single pane of glass from a SIEM perspective. You know, you have the ability then to go and create these playbooks, saying, okay, my NDR, my EDR is telling me these things. I've got a critical problem. I've got a critical host. I need to do something about it. That's really where, you know, the things like Sentinel come into their play of being able to say, actually, I want to go and do something now. I want to make sure I deal with that. But it all comes down
It's
to
a
that.
nice little lead in there, David, to a webinar we're doing next week on Sentinel and advanced threat hunting inside the platform, because as you said, there's a great deal of orchestration, automation that you can implement through Sentinel. Very powerful tool set. We'll actually cover that in that webinar and encourage people to sign up for that as well.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's a really useful thing to think about. I think when you're talking about the orchestration side of things, you know, we speak to lots of people about this, and lots of them are going, while they wouldn't necessarily just isolate a host automatically, they may use a lot of orchestration to automate some of the threat hunting, to automate some of the responses. So go and create a ticket, go and let the SOC tier 1 team know this is going on. You know, that's really important. And when you can do that at speed, it makes a big difference. So yeah, I'd urge you as well to go and look at that. Let's look at the network detection response part of that. So for us, it's important, you know, the network now isn't just packets, you know, if you think about it from that perspective. While it says network, you know, think about that as not only covering your on-prem, it also covers your IaaS in the cloud. It also covers SaaS-based applications. It's also pulling in log information from the control plane, both in Azure, Microsoft, AWS, as well as things like Office 365. But also the beauty of having it at a network level, and the sensors we have is we don't care about this. It's agentless. So any IoTs, OT, IT equipment that can't have an agent installed on it, you're still going to see it because it's still going to be talking to each other. What's also important is that rich network data. So to give you the forensics, the IR, the threat hunting capabilities, we have the ability not only to pull in that, we extract that metadata and give you the ability to hunt that, whether that be in Sentinel, whether that be in our SaaS offering, whether that be in your own data lake, whatever that may be. It's really important that you have that data for that response and threat hunting. And also identity-based response and containment. You know, we have direct integrations with Azure AD, on-prem AD, but we're also looking at that Kerberos activity to see what's going on. We're going to look for what are these high-value credentials. Are they being used in a way they shouldn't do? We know attackers are trying to get hold of high-value credentials because they can pretty much do what they want. But think about things like a backup account. You know, it's very clear that backup accounts are used in a way that we would be able to understand and say, okay, well, you know, this backup account does certain things over certain protocols from a machine to multiple machines. But if suddenly that service account's being used on a low value machine trying to access other high value credentials, it normally doesn't. It's really easy to get a detection on that and understand what's going on. If we move across then to the endpoint, so Defender ATP, for example, you know, there's no additional deployment and infrastructure for Windows. It's already there. It's up to date. It's easy for you to do. You don't have to own another agent. You know, I think most people are sick to death of installing more and more agents on this. It's built on the industry's deepest insights into Windows and threats. You know, Microsoft Defender ATP, you know, many moons ago, I think it was, you know, Microsoft were never considered as a serious player in the security perspective, but Defender ATP does a fantastic job. It's a very serious EDR contender now, and the fact it is so well integrated into the Windows OS platform and has so many of those insights directly from Microsoft, it makes a big difference, and I think a lot of people like that. you know, you can take those customer security to a new level, you know, not only just simpler logs, but the ability to do remediation, to look deeper into it and understand what's going on and do it at scale. That's the big thing. A lot of products out there are saying they can do this for you, but when you get to this at scale and you're talking thousands of IPs, thousands of endpoints, that often tips the scales to, again, another alert fatigue problem. You've got just loads of things you can't deal with. You can also then synchronize all that defense with detection, exploration across all those devices, so it speeds up that response and recovery. Once you've got those alerts and that high value detection of things you need to deal with, the fact you can then instantly jump on your endpoint, your response, and you can deal with that very quickly. It's really important to be able to do that fast. You know, partnering across can also extend their security offerings on top of an open framework. So we make this very API open. So if people want to build their own connections, their own conduits, whatever it might be, you know, if you can do it in our UI, you can certainly do it in the API. So you can build whatever you want on top of this platform. So, you know, it's that cohesive multi-layered defense across endpoint and network. This really makes a big difference, and I can't harbour on about this a lot more. The fact you can, you know, there's, if you look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework, obviously there's certain things that I think we see 92% of all the MITRE ATT&CK framework at a network level. But there's lots of things like memory scraping, like forging of Kerberos credentials that you'll only see on the endpoint. So the sum of the parts of these things make it a much bigger problem solver, because not only can you see these things are happening at the endpoint perspective, you also see these things are happening at the network. When you put those two things together, when you use things like Sentinel, you can much quicker get to where this problem is and go, okay, this is a bigger problem, I know what it is. So the real, you know, the benefits to the customer and the key things, you can contextualize that network attack and the real process tree to understand what's going on. Defender ATP can take immediate action on that because we know we can isolate that. And you can streamline that threat remediation, so you can really understand what's going on, because you've got both types of inputs. Across those, you really get an understanding of what's going on. And then we drop into the SIM and UEBA. So in this case, we're thinking about things like Azure Sentinel. You know, you can still collect all those logs. It's very useful to be able to do that, but you've got customized alerting and analytics as well. There is some anomaly detection in there as well to see whether user behavior is going on there, but it's also this extensive workflow opportunities. You can build many things in there to say, if this happens, I want to do this. The playbooks you can build are really important. And it sounds, from what Joe's saying, there's going to be another webinar to go into Sentinel to understand exactly what you could do from a response. Having these two great sources of information, the network, the endpoint, feeding that up into a comprehensive SIM and playbook makes a big difference. If you look at that from an Azure Sentinel end-to-end solution, you know, obviously you've got the ability to collect that information. You're looking to detect, so you've got that analytics and threat hunting. You can then investigate and respond. You know, this is a big difference. You know, the ability to go and do these things makes it much easier for SOCs to be efficient. Excuse me. And that comes down to the what we talked about earlier. Is not only do you have all of the information, but it's the ability to threat hunt and do these things at speed. And that's where the automation and the investigate comes into things. So collecting that security data in cloud at scale, you know, direct integration, you can pull in things from Azure, from Office 365, security alerts, activity data. We're collecting logs, both in Ceph, syslog, Windows, Linux, whatever format that might be. You can pull in Taxi, MS Graph, and threat indicators directly into Azure Sentinel as well. And also you've got these APIs and custom logs, so where we can integrate directly with Azure Sentinel as well. The security orchestration part and the automation, you know, that's something we've talked about a few times here, but, you know, it's very open APIs, you know, the endpoint, the network ecosystem, we can pull into that. We can facilitate the enrichment across those workflows. But the important thing is coordinating what you're doing with that. So if you look at, you know, the next slide here, you know, start and track investigations, you can prioritize, you can look at actionable things you need to go onto that. So in this case, we've got AWS monitor credentials abuse or hijack. You know, I've got something in here I can deal with. What I want to do with it's very high value. You know, we can feed our alerts directly into that as well. So we can, some of these alerts might be coming direct from Vectra AI, you know, from the detect platform. It's saying, you know, this machine is doing things in a way that you should expect to be able to deal with it. Then you can build these playbooks. So use the incident to collect related alerts, events, and bookmarks, manage the assignments and track the status of what's going on there, add tags, things like that. You can trigger automated playbooks. Like I said, this is when you suddenly go from a very siloed SOC to full automation. There's things that I want to be able to do. If the EDR is telling me things to do, have the Sentinel be that single point of, that single pane of glass, which allows you to move deeper into the network to understand. It's easy to visualize that as well. Sentinel gives them great visualizations of that attack, so you can build into the scope and impact of what's going on there. You can really look in to see where this strange login happened, where this suspicious behavior happened, who it's affected. This is something we also have in Vectra AI, which we call our campaigns, so we can see if there's an attack campaign going in there. But it's really useful to give you deep insights to this attack has happened, how do I need to deal with it? And then we've got these automated playbooks we talked about. So the ability to do something with that, now we've got it. So you can build those scalable playbooks. When and you look at it on the right here, when a response to Azure Sentinel is triggered, create an incident in service power, post a message on our Teams SOC channel, send an approval email, and then some conditions of what you're going to do. If you want to do this, then go and block it in Azure AD, or go and tell the incident and close it in ServiceNow. These playbooks, this is a simple example here, but they can be as simple as complicated as you want to make them. They don't have to be really arduous, but there's certain things that you can really do at speed that makes a big difference.
We love, especially not only for the response bits, but also for data enrichment. So one thing gets detected in one area of some data feed into Azure Sentinel, and then we can go back and correlate across the endpoint or across the network via Vectra AI to really start to understand more information about that as well.
100%, yeah. This is a really important thing, is data enrichment. A lot of the SOC analysts we've talked to said they need more information. While we give you very high value detections from that, sometimes it's really important to go and pull in. You can with us, so you might want to pull in the metadata of what was happening and how many connections and what they were talking to. The sky really is the limit here, and it's really limited purely by the imagination of the SOC analysts of how do we want to build this, what do we want to enrich that data with. The more data you have, the more sensible decisions you can make very quickly. So I hope that resonates with people, but we've certainly seen more and more automation coming into it, and I think it's a big part of that Gartner SOC Visibility Triad. For here example, we've got an AR detect. This is coming from Vectra AI. We're saying, what's been going on here? We've seen that this machine's been doing something. We've got a workbook that's built in. So we've actually got some things that are integrated directly into Azure. We've got this connector, which allows you to pull things in directly from that. You can then include that visualization workbook we talked about. There's sample queries and custom detections. So, we've already got these built into Sentinel. We've got a load of playbooks already there for you. So if you want to start building your playbooks from that directly, you can. You can pull these things in, and it makes a big difference. So, these playbooks are here to be used. We are Vectra AI are happy to help you and work with you on those. If there's things customers want, we can build those into more depth. So hopefully that explains, how the automation can really help. Like Joe was saying, the ability to enrich it as well is really important. But the more and more people we talk to, they're saying, it's about automation. It's about doing these things at speed. That's really, really important to them. So if we take a deeper look at how we do things, so sample deployment for Vectra AI, we've got both these on-prem sensors that can pull network traffic directly from your switches, your infrastructure. We've also got virtual sensors that can sit in your data center, whether that's VMware or whether that might be Hyper-V or whatever that might be. We can pull metadata directly from that. We've also got virtual taps that can sit within Azure as well, or other public clouds like AWS or things like that. So we can pull in direct network traffic from those IaaS platforms. But also, and this is the important thing, is pulling in information from Office 365. I think most people are starting to move into that Office 365 environment. Again, not to harp on about it, but if you talk about the SolarWinds Breach, they were using Office 365 credentials, and they were using O365 to compromise those and then move deeper into that to get higher value credentials. So what we're doing is we're pulling all of this information into what we call our brain, which is the AI and the ML that works on the back end. What's really important to talk about when you're talking about any AI-based platform, certainly from an NDR perspective, It's really important you can do that at speed. And when I say that, we're talking, 10, 20, 30, 50 gigabits a second worth of network traffic and other information being pulled in. But how they do that is important. I know everyone hears about AI and how everyone's got AI now, but not all AI is created equal. When you're testing anything that's AI-based product, I always say, the end user shouldn't, the vendor shouldn't need a VPN connection to your brain. If they've got a VPN connection to the brain, it's quite clear that they are, stacking the deck in their favor on the back end. What we like to do is say, look, completely cut us off and let the algorithms speak for themselves. And that's really important. There's two parts that how we build our algorithms in there. And a good example I often give is there's a very large manufacturer of mobile devices. I won't give you names, but they came to us and said, we love what you do. This is the right way to do things, of leveraging AI to look for attacker behavior in your environment. But they rightly said to us, we've got some of the best data scientists in the world. We can go and do this ourselves. We'll go and build models. And off they went and tried that. And we couldn't argue. They do have, some of the best data scientists out there. They're doing voice recognition, all kinds of clever things. They dutifully came back to us and said, yeah, it's really important to know what to look for. And this is why when you look at how we build our models, it's a combination of both security research and data scientists. Data scientists can build your model to look for something, but if they don't know what X is or what that something is, it's really hard to build that model. So, it's not just about the maths, it's understanding, again, bring this back to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the Lockheed kill chain, knowing how attackers have to behave. It's not like they want to behave, it's how they have to behave, because there's certain steps you have to go through. So when you're building models, it's important that the security research team have a good input into this to say, okay, you need to be looking for this type of behavior. And then helping the data scientists and the analysts looking at it and say, okay, if we're going to build a model, what's the right tool to do that? Don't be precious to say that we're going to do everything with Bayesian estimation, we're going to do everything with this type of learning, or we're going to use unsupervised machine learning. A lot of people out there and our competitors as well are using solely unsupervised machine learning. And it's a great tool. Unsupervised machine learning makes a lot of sense. I'm going to learn what does normal look like in my environment. The problem with solely using that approach is if you've got bad in your environment already, because it's there to start with, when the AI starts learning, it will learn bad as good because it already exists. So we've always leveraged a combination of both supervised and unsupervised machine learning. And the reason for that is, that one, they keep each other honest because there's certain things you can pre-train to look for. So we're going to look for command and control activity, how that behaves. We can pre-train that against attacker tools that are commonly available out there. And that's what gives you a really high value set of rule sets, because not only are they looking at it and saying, okay, unsupervised, for example, is a good example. Look at Kerberos traffic. How do accounts and how do service accounts get used in the environment? That's a great use of unsupervised machine learning. When it comes to things like encrypted traffic, so a lot of people often ask us, how do you deal with encrypted traffic? The answer to that is now the man in the middle approach that's been around for a long time doesn't really work. And the reason that doesn't work is you've got that problem that, certificate pinning, whatever it might be, or the hackers are smart enough to go and use a particularly strange and random encryption algorithm, think Blowfish or something like that. A lot of these man in the middle tools won't actually support these lower level encryption algorithms. So what you end up with is the inability to decrypt these things in the first place. So what Vectra's done, we've built some really clever AI models that look for how that traffic behaves. Does it feel like someone on the inside made a connection to the outside, and then all the subsequent requests have come from the outside in? We can look at the ebb and flow of that traffic without even unencrypting it to say, it feels like this is a machine being controlled from the outside. And that's a good example of how you can have supervised machine learning. We can use data sets like, even, for example, think Teams, think Zoom, think things like that. If you give control of your machine to someone else, the dynamic of that traffic flow changes very differently. And it suddenly shows you, okay, this machine is being controlled from the outside in. Our AI is so smart at that. Not only can we tell you if it feels like this is a graphical user interface that's controlling the machine, we can also tell you if it feels like it's command line. So think things like Metasploit, things like Cobalt Strike, which is the, excuse me, the C2 connection that was being used in SolarWinds, for example. We can pre-train the algorithms to look for certain traits within this behavior. If you look at how the traffic behaves, typically it's going to be there's going to be gaps in between it while the hackers are analyzing that data to see, okay, I've got this information, I've got these credentials, are they important to me? So when you're building models, it's really important to make sure that you're building models using all the right tools. You know, I always jokingly say, you know, you can open a can of beans with a Swiss Army knife, but you wouldn't do it every day. You'd have a proper can opener in the kitchen, right? So it's important that when you're building models, you're going to use the right tool sets for that. Yes, there's lots of AI now that's using recursive neural networks and deep learning, because that's a really powerful tool. But there's lots of other things like random forest, like excuse me, k-means clustering, where you can use particular types of AI and machine learning to look for very specific things. So, you know, when we deploy, it's really important that not only are we deploying into the network to get as much information, we're always also analyzing it the right way. And to do that means you have many, many sets. We've got, you know, well over 100 plus different algorithms firing, with 70 of those that have got patents pending. You know, it's really difficult to do what we do. So when you're looking at, you know, AI products, make sure you're looking at them and going, okay, is everything created equal? Are you doing the same sorts of things? It's really important that, I think, when you talk about AI. So, you know, as we talked about at the start, thinking about the SOC Visibility Triad, you know, from an NDR perspective, it's really important that we're pulling in all of this information. So in this case, we're not only pulling in network traffic, whether that be cloud, whether that be a data center, we're also pulling in those logs from other things. Think about as well, when we start moving deeper into Azure and other cloud platforms, is the control plane. You know, the ability to look at, you know, okay, well, these API keys get used to spin up these machines, or these API keys get created to create security groups within Azure to allow them to access either, you know, SaaS or IS applications. You know, those can also be compromised. You know, hackers are really looking for these API keys that allow them to get into the cloud. You know, we've seen examples where hackers have actually spun up their own command and control infrastructure on a customer's network, but because it was, you know, small machines that were costing single dollars a month sort of thing, no one even noticed it was going on, but it was hiding behind a good customer's, you know, brand and recognition. And that's also one of the big things to think about when if you're compromised, which we know, you know, is not a case of will I be, it's when will it be happen and how quickly can I respond. The ability to protect your brand, you know, if suddenly you've been compromised and someone's using your infrastructure to do more attacker behavior, it's really important that you can cover that. And it's often something we talk about when we're talking with our customers, is going, you know, do we have the ability to look into this at more depth? So that's how we deploy, that's how we do into the platform. Obviously, you can see on the side there's the, you know, the ability to also pull in information from both Defender ATP and also send that information out to Azure Sentinel. And it's that cohesive, you know, end-to-end that's really important. Oh, and also VM and agents, right? I didn't realize there's a last build on there, but the ability to also pull in from virtual machines as well. We can pull them in directly for you. So if we sort of round back to that SOC visibility process, triad, you know, the outcomes you really want is to help the people, to help the process, and to use all of your technology together. You know, enhance that visibility. You know, we want to be able to see more. We want to understand what that's going on. Optimize that SOC team. Optimize the budget. We've often found with things like this, if you've already got E5 licensing and things like that, you know, putting us in an efficient and making that more efficient actually becomes a net neutral cost to the customer. You know, it's actually not costing them anymore because they're so much more efficient. They're not burning through man hours of doing manual hunting. Making sure you integrate that security architecture, you know, all of these things talking together. Like I said, the sum of the parts is greater than the machine. You know, it's important to make sure, you know, sorry, the machine is greater than the sum of the parts. It's important to make sure that all these things work together and efficiently. You know, if you've got siloed security tools, you often end up with big problems where, you know, you don't actually have 100% visibility of what's going on, or one team's getting data from one area, one team's getting data from the other, and they don't have the ability to put those things together. And what that all means when you get this right from the SOC visibility is the ability to reduce that dwell time. You know, reduce the dwell time is important. You know, the mean time to detect and the mean time to respond is what's really important. If you can catch things early on in the MITRE attack, so they've got control of the machine, they're starting to look around. If you catch them at that point, long before they've escalated privileges and damaged AD or started extracting data, you know, you've saved yourself a lot of time and potentially a lot of heartache if you were compromised. So hopefully that's been really interesting. You know, I really appreciate everyone's time. I know we've got some time to talk about Q&A. So Joe, was there anything you wanted to add before I move on to the Q&A?
No, not on our end. Let's see. I think So we do have one question on the Q&A. If you're ready to go, we can go through and take a look at some of those.
Certainly, let's go for it.
All right, so the first question actually is for me. It's talking about Cyber Defense Center and that it can be a managed service that does all of this. Yes, Cyber Defense Center is a managed service from Comtact that weaves together Azure Sentinel as a primary SOC and SIM tool set combined with other solutions. So in some cases, we have customers that are using Azure Sentinel with ATP Defender and Vectra and be able to pull all that together. And our team, based out of our SOC NOC in Milton Keynes, can manage that for our customers. And so we have a lot of experience working with Azure Sentinel, a lot of, and our webinar series really covers on a couple of those areas. But we can definitely provide those services, and our team would be happy to chat with you about that.
Yeah, that's often quite useful. I think a lot of organizations, while they, their journey to SOC 2.0 is probably quite a complex and difficult journey, and if you can't hire the resources, having a great partner that can provide you those managed services is really important. We work well with our MSP partners, like here. I think if you don't have the skill sets, it's important to make sure you can get them.
Well, the challenge, as you mentioned earlier, is kind of that talent drain right now, especially in the UK. I think it's more profound here than other places around the world, where there's a strong need for cybersecurity talent, and we just simply can't train enough people. And so where you can be able to leverage a third party that can remotely manage that environment for you, be able to identify triage instance, do that investigation, and work with you to do managed threat response. All of that really allows the internal IT teams to focus on, more strategic, relevant topics and leave the care feeding and some of that automation to their support team.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, a lot of these, I'll call them detections, but things that happen now, it's new stuff. It's like a lot of the times the SOC teams look at it going, what does this mean? What is the impact to me? And I think having security professionals that can back you up and help with that is a big part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it also takes some of the other noise away, such as the care and feeding, just making sure everything's, feeding in well, so you don't discover in the middle of an incident that for some reason some logs haven't been arriving for the last couple of months. And so you have a dark spot, lack of visibility, if you will. So having all of that through a managed service makes a tons of sense. And from our perspective, we love the ability to weave these technologies together, because as we see something, as I mentioned earlier in Azure Sentinel, we can set up automatic data enrichment calls back into Vectra AI to understand what was going on with the network at that point in time. So we know that something's happening. What else can we see? And that ability to explore the environment, really understand contextually what was happening, not just the log entries that we see in front of us, really help with that data enrichment, really help understand when things are truly an issue to be resolved versus something that we want to monitor, or even something that we want to mark as a false positive. But ultimately, all of that helping the teams get more efficient so that you can avoid things like alert fatigue, because automation can help the teams automate that process.
Yeah, 100%. I've certainly come across multiple customers that come to us that have gone to the managed service route, mainly because they might have gone down the journey of deploying a SIM early days, but a SIM really is, think of it as your own vegetable garden. If you don't feed and water it, it becomes just a briar patch. And the amount of times that we've gone in and people have gone, yeah, this just isn't effective anymore, because, or they fine-tuned it to the nth degree that they now have. So what you were saying, snow blindness, I call it. They just can't see the wood from the trees anymore, because every time they've
so often with them that the snow blindness, I think, comes also from the data that's coming in. So they don't tune log sources out. They don't really refine the signal to noise ratios. And so it just becomes so noisy to the point that it just collects dust on the shelf. And unless it decides to send an email, organizations, just kind of leave it where it's at. But definitely a lot of opportunity to improve. The tool set out there is definitely making it easier for security analysts and teams to support it. One of the things we're so excited about is you could tell Azure Sentinel was built with the security analyst in mind, because a lot of the things that security analysts need to do that are time consuming and add, the noise to the process and take them away from focusing on, investigation and threat response. All of those things are highly automated within the solution. So we're excited to use the tool set, and of course, weave that in with Vectra AI. Are there any other questions from the audience before we look to wrap up for today? Hopefully this has been a good session and there's been some great content shared with you. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them into the live event Q&A and we'll answer those before we close out today. Anything you wanted to cover, David, while we're waiting for any final questions?
No, I was going to make one point, which is just sort of when we talk about Microsoft now, and Microsoft's probably one of our biggest customers. We work well with them, and I think they're very good now at working and integrating with other security vendors. I think they've realised that the security play is the most important thing for them now. So it's really impressive to see where they've come from and where they are now. And I think that, like you said, they've clearly hired some smart people that know how SOC analysts work and what they need to do. And I think they will be a force to reckon with. It's really important. Certainly with people that have E3, E5 licenses, a lot of these tools are available to them.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in those licenses, and as organizations look at Microsoft more broadly, I think the days where Microsoft solutions weren't considered at the forefront of technology, especially in the security realm, to put that as politely as possible, I think are over. There's a huge amount of investment internally, and as I said, they've really tapped into some of their strengths. And one of the beautiful things about Azure Sentinel is the fact that it's so deeply integrated into Azure, and it's able to look at a ton of data that customers already are collecting without realizing it. And so it really shines a light on the benefit of a fully integrated platform like Azure, where you have data coming from Office 365, data coming from your VM instances or your other services, data coming from other systems that are feeding into log analytics, and being able to mine all of that from a security perspective becomes really interesting.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, and thank everyone for joining us. We're going to close it down. If you have any other follow-up questions, of course, feel free to reach out to us, and our team will be in contact thanking you and sending additional details along. But thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much, David, for co-presenting today.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Joe.
Cheers.